Welcome to Living with the Times. Today is the Yurtzeit, the anniversary of the passing of one of the most influential and fascinating personalities in Jewish history, and that is the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria. He was born in 1534 in Jerusalem, and his Brit was later the place when the Or HaChaim came from Morocco to live in Israel. He established a yeshiva in the very place where traditionally the Arizal had his circumcision. When the Arizal was approximately 5 years old, he lost his father, and his mother was left with no means of support. It happens that her brother, Mordechai Francis, lived in Egypt, and he was quite wealthy, a wealthy businessman. And so she brought her family, including the Arizal, to Egypt. And the Ariz's uncle, his mother's brother, provided for them, and he also provided the Arizal to learn with the greatest of the sages of Egypt, including the Radbaz, a very, very famous rabbi, and the Rabbi Betzalel, known as the book he wrote, the Shita Mikubetzet. By the time he was a late teenager, he had mastered the written and oral tradition, and he was introduced to the mystical tradition. And as tradition goes, that for approximately the next 15 or so years, he delved into the very depths of the Kabbalah, especially the Zohar. And it's told that for a period of approximately 7 years, he spent virtually all of his time, except for Shabbat, when he would go back to his wife and children. He actually married the daughter of his uncle, first cousin. And he spent the whole week in isolation on this hut on the Nile River, and delved into especially the Zohar, as I said. According to tradition, Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, came to learn with him. And after he had mastered the Kabbalistic tradition up to that point, Eliyahu Navi told him he needed to move to Tzfat, that he didn't have that much more time in the world, and that he especially had to teach to one particular student, Rabbi Chaim Vital. The Arizal was actually totally happy to stay with Eliyahu Navi in the hut in the Nile River. He was very, very humble. He did not seek fame or fortune, but he was really instructed from heaven to go to Tzfat. He went in 1570 at the age of approximately 36 years old with his family. And he came to Tzfat in a previous Living with the Times, in the section called Remembering the Ramak. I told the story of how the Arizal came to Tzfat and how he took over from Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who had set up a yeshiva for learning Kabbalah. Now, the amazing thing is that the teachings of the Arizal changed Jewish thought forever, changed Judaism, and yet he only spent 2 years in Tzfat. He tragically passed away at the age of 38 from a plague that swept through the city. And he was only there 2 to 2.5 years. And afterwards, his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, took his teachings. The Ari wrote nothing of himself, and he left no notes. We have 3 poems on Shabbat that are traditionally said that he wrote in Aramaic, very well-known poems that people say every Shabbat, but none of his teachings were left in written form. But Rabbi Chaim Vital gathered all the notes that he had taken and all the students had taken, and he then spent 20 years until he passed away in Damascus, 20 years after the Arizal. And his son, Shmuel Vital, finished the work that his father had done and published what became known as the Kitvei HaAri, the writings of the Ari. They're traditionally put in 8 volumes, a tremendous work. But the amazing thing is, it was all given over in teachings from 2 to 2.5 years. We could only imagine, had the Ari lived longer, what other great secrets he would have revealed. So I just want to also tell the story of how Rabbi Chaim Vital became his student. So when the Ramak passed away, so again, I invite everyone to listen to a previous Living with the Times, Remembering the Ramak. So the Arizal took over as being the main teacher of Kabbalah in Tzfat. And at the time, Rabbi Chaim Vital, who many thought, including himself, that he was the natural one to take over from the Ramak, he wasn't there when the Ramak passed away. He was in Damascus. And he heard that his teacher had passed away, and he started getting reports that someone else had taken over. And he was a bit upset about this. And so he decided to come back to Israel and see what was happening, and to meet this person who had apparently was now the new Kabbalah teacher in Tzfat. So he came back and he asked where the Arizal. As I mentioned, when he was in Egypt, so he was provided for by his uncle. But very, very interesting enough, in the famous Cairo Geniza that was discovered, I'm not sure exactly when, about 100 years ago, they actually found receipts signed by the Arizal when he worked with his uncle. And so actually when he was fairly young, he was involved in the business of his uncle. So when he came to Tzfat, he had to provide for his family. So he opened up a little, we'll call it a hardware store. And so when Chaim Vital came to Tzfat, he heard, you want to find the Arizal? He's in his store. So the first thing he thought is, a store? He runs a store? He's a Kabbalah teacher, and he's running a store? So the story goes, he went, and he came in, and the Arizal had Ruach HaKodesh. He understood that this was the person who just walked through the door of his store, that he was sent by heaven, by Eliyahu Navi, to come and teach. And he said, can I help you? And Rabbi Chaim Vital, in a sense, was so upset that here was supposedly this great Kabbalah teacher who's running a hardware store. And he said, no, thank you. And he started to walk out. And the Arizal said, perhaps you were interested in learning the secret of a certain part of the Zohar. Now, it turns out that Rabbi Chaim Vital, when he came to the Arizal, he was going to ask them about that particular piece. So when the Arizal said that, he knew that there's something up here. And he said, yes, I would like to learn that. And the Ari began to explain this part of the Zohar. And Rabbi Chaim Vital was, used in modern terms, he was blown away by the depth of knowledge and insight of the Arizal. And he realized, like, I have to learn from this person. Rabbi Chaim Vital had a insatiable desire to learn all the secrets of the Torah. And so the Arizal said, that's all I can teach you right now. And so the Rabbi Chaim Vital left, and the story says that he cried the whole night, he fasted, and he begged God, let me become a student of the Arizal. The next day, he caught the Arizal as he was walking to shul, and he practically fell down on his hands and knees and begged him to take him as a student. And the Arizal said, on the merit of your crying and praying and fasting all night, you're now ready to learn what I have to teach. So this became one of the most productive relationships in all of Jewish history, really. The Arizal, and we'll call him his scribe, the person who would pass on the teachings. And the Ari was actually happy just to teach the Rabbi Chaim Vital because he felt that he had a directive from heaven. And it was really Rabbi Chaim Vital who persuaded the Ari to take approximately 20 other students. And so the Ari, sometimes he's called the lion. And Ari is a lion. And the students were called the lion cubs. And for the next 2.5 years, the Ari taught the students. And I'll just end with a story that there's two causes of the Ari leaving this world. And one was he was directed from heaven to teach everything that he knew to Rabbi Chaim Vital. And there was one secret teaching that he didn't feel the time was right to reveal to anyone. And Rabbi Chaim Vital knew that he knew the secret, and he begged him to teach him. And the Ari hinted very strongly that I have to teach you everything that I know, but I'm telling you that it will be very detrimental to you and me and the world if I reveal this right now. So you would think that Rabbi Chaim Vital would say, okay, I'll wait. But again, he had this insatiable desire to learn everything he could about the Torah, especially the secrets of the Torah. So he begged the Arizal over and over and over again. And because the Ari felt this was his purpose, was to teach over to the Arizal, to Chaim Vital. So he revealed this secret to him, and Rabbi Chaim Vital was very happy. And then he hinted to him very strongly that it would lead to his death. And he said, I don't feel bad for myself, but I feel bad for you and the other students in the world that I won't have a chance to really reveal everything that I could. Shortly after that, a plague swept through Tzfat, and many of the students of the Ari, they gathered together in this one courtyard. In those days, there would be individual apartments around the central courtyard. And many of them gathered in this courtyard, and the plague raged throughout Tzfat. And the Ari told them, we'll be fine as long as there's no disagreements, no anger, no disagreements among us. And everything was going well. But you can imagine it was a very, very tense situation. And so, frustrations build up. So one day, the kids were outside playing in the courtyard, and they kind of got in a little fight with each other. And then the parents went out and they took sides with their children. And before you know it, there was yelling and screaming and fighting. And the Ari is watching this, and he says, "You have no idea what you've done here. You have no idea." And a few days later, the Ari passed away from this plague at the age of 38. And the story continues that when they buried the Arizal, and he's buried right over the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who's at the feet of the Arizal in the famous cemetery in Sfat. And they say that Rabbi Chaim Vital was so distraught that his teacher and master had passed away. He literally jumped into the grave site, and he didn't want to be separated from the Arizal. They had to literally pull him out. And so at the age of 38, the Arizal passed away. Today is the 5th of Av, and I have merited to be in Sfat on this day. Thousands and thousands of people come to the gravesite of the Arizal, and the whole day there's teachings, and it's almost like a fair. People are selling books, and it's more like celebrating the life and the contribution of the Arizal. As I said before, the Ari's teachings fundamentally changed Jewish thought. He introduced so many ideas that we just take for granted. Some people are not even aware they come from the Arizal. And one of the biggest reasons is that the Baal Shem Tov, who lived approximately 150 years, was born 150 years after the Arizal, he was able to take the teachings of the Arizal, which are given over in a very, very high level. The Ari was not trying to bring his teachings down to beginners. He was talking on a very, very high level, and either you understood him or you didn't. But the Baal Shem Tov was able to take these concepts, these ideas, and translate them into a way that everyone could understand. And of course, the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. And so the entire Hasidic movement is seeped and dripping with Kabbalah, but it's in a different language than the Ari gave it over. The Baal Shem was able to translate it into ideas that could be easily understood and taught over to others. And so hopefully in the short time what we've just had, we'll have an appreciation of the greatness of the Arizal. And I urge everyone to try to learn more about what the Ari actually taught and his innovative ideas. So we should all pray that in this day the soul of the Arizal has an aliyat neshama, and that his teachings of Kabbalah will infuse the Jewish people with new inspiration that will spread to the whole world.